Welcome to the Mentors and Moguls podcast. I'm your host, Heather Stone. I bring you mentors and moguls from all around the world, different walks of life, from creatives to CEOs to business leaders to top athletes and all kinds of other people in between. We often talk about how to go from stuck to unstoppable. Well, I have a surprise for you. Today, our special guest went from homelessness to heartfelt industry leader. Scoggins. He's an 8-figure serial entrepreneur of multiple businesses, and he's dedicated himself to serving the person he used to be. So if you're out there wondering, where do I go next? I don't have a lot of mentors. I have no hope. I have no direction. Wherever you are, stay tuned because Stephen is going to uplift you, excite you, ignite your enthusiasm, and give you some great tools to how you can take the next step in your journey on the way to joy and success. Hello, Stephen. How are you today?
What's going on? So good to see you.
Good to see you too. This has been a crazy year. I met you earlier this year, and I was so impressed by your humility, your story, and I thought he's got to come on the show and he needs to share his story with other people that are really struggling. COVID has really brought out the best in people and sometimes underlying conditions that are tough stories, and people are really struggling with mental health. How do I get over dealing with anxiety, with hopelessness? And you've got a fantastic story that I hope you can share with our audience today, really talking about desperation and turning that into your destiny. So take it away, Stephen. Tell us, turn back the clock and tell us how you took some tough times in your early 20s and became the wonderful, giving man that you are.
Well, first of all, thank you for saying that. That's definitely been an interesting road getting here. Let's put it that way. You know, it's funny. I feel like I used to think my story was like super special, like, you know, because it kind of reads like Forrest Gump or like Joseph from the Bible or something, like, you know, you're constantly having these negative things happen. And then as you look back, you're able to see that everything that you thought was negative is actually something that was going to be used as a positive in a future date and time. And I think I first got wind of the fact that I was going to have to grow up fast when I was around 9 years old. My grandmother came to me, who was raising me at the time. I had literally had like a transformer in one hand and a GI Joe in another, and you know, like doing my whole little, you know, playing thing. You know, if you think about a 9-year-old, we don't have the mental acuity to deal with anything life organized, right? Well, she sits me down and she's in a black chair in this old 1970s home. It's like maybe 1,000 square foot in the kitchen with an old white and like orange colored like linoleum it wasn't carpet, linoleum stuff, right?
Right.
And she sits down and she's got massive tears in her eyes. And now keep in mind, this is the woman who essentially was from my memories, right? So there's obviously memories before that I could have memories of my own. That basically was raised. She was my mother in many respects. You know, she was encouraging, she was loving, she was empowering, she treated me well. Like if I did something wrong, I might get a pop on the butt, but I also got an explanation why I got a pop on the butt, you know, kind of thing. And she came to me one afternoon and she was just in tears and she just said, "I'm going to need your help around the house." Right. And I, you know, hindsight being 2020, I can realize now that she was just dumbing it down enough for my little brain to understand what was going on. And of course, what do? You put the transformer, the GI Joe down and you're like, what do you need? How can I help you? You know, what's going on? And, you know, I went over to the next stage, was she, start dragging chair over to the stove, the old tan looking stove, right? Like I said, the 1970s style. And she starts teaching me how to boil water, right? Boil water to make oatmeal, boil water to make ramen noodles, boil water to make mac and cheese, boil water to make all these different hot dogs, like all these different things that she taught me how to pull a stool over to the fridge and actually get the milk out of there with both hands, not just one, both hands, and then learn to pour the milk in the, and she did that because, within a short amount of time, cancer is what she had. And this is, in the mid 80s, and in the mid 80s, the chemotherapy was just as dangerous as the cancer itself. Right. It's her prognosis wasn't great. Obviously she never told me that. And, within a few weeks, she was using me as her personal cane, going to and from the, end to end of the house. I watched her lose her hair. I watched her go through a lot of traumatic issues regarding the cancer. And then I was kind of left there to take care of my little brother and her, right? So my little brother's 3 years younger than me. So he was 6 at the time. And your brain really quickly kind of like, I don't know, I rapidly began to process information.
Right.
right? Circumstantial awareness, situational awareness, because the best way to say it. And that kind of like started the road of growing up super fast. I look back now and I realize that over the course of my life, I haven't had much of a childhood. So I have a hard time even with my own kids from time to time. They'll find something that's super silly and funny. I'm like, I just don't get it, kind of thing.
Right.
And so that turned into, she passed away, and when I turned 11, my parents come back in the picture. I immediately go to work in the construction industry with my dad. My brother goes to Florida with my mom, so family split completely. And that's where I met my first mentor. And for some reason, I asked his widow when he passed away, when I wrote my first book, why me? Why did he help me the way he helped me? She just said, "Well, Stephen, he just saw himself in you, and that's why he did it. We just love you so much." And I said, "But I was a complete idiot on more than one occasion. Like, to be sure, I tested y'all's patience." She says, "Oh yeah, y'all tested our patience. You sure did, right?" And lo and behold, Steve would pull me down. His name was Steve Myrick. He'd pull me down at the framing crew. He'd put me in this environment where he was constantly challenging me. So my father was an alcoholic. So he would talk about don't get involved in alcohol. My grandfather, who was my father's father, who was my best friend, who was Steve Myrick's best friend, obviously was an alcoholic due to Pearl Harbor. So he survived Pearl Harbor and, sort of self-medicating PTSD. All that to say that without Steve Myrick, I don't know that I would be in the same circumstance or situation I'm in today.
He was your angel.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and the reality is I want to be this. People ask me all the time, why do you do this other thought leadership stuff? Why are you even doing it? Right? You have a business. You could run that business and probably continue to scale it. And I'm like, I just want to be Steve Myrick to as many people as I possibly can.
Love it.
Right? He changed my life radically.
Mm-hmm.
And the first conversation was around this aspect of, I remember this afternoon, I was 16 or 17 years old. It was a hot summer day. He pulls me down off the framing crew like he had done 1,000 times before. And he puts me in the Jeep Grand Cherokee. He looks over at me, staring at me, and he goes, "Stephen, what's the difference between a rich man and a poor man?" I went, "Well, shoot, money. Of course it's money." You're like, what you have to understand is my dad, even now to a certain degree, I love him. He's amazing. He's an amazing grandfather, but to a certain degree, he still has a poverty mindset. Right. Mm-hmm. And I was being indoctrinated into this poverty mindset. And because that's what my family history had always known.
Yes.
Yeah. So what Steve was trying to do is to shake me out of that. And come to find out, someone shook Steve out of that. But when he asked me this question, he said, "Absolutely not. It's the way they think. It's the way they think." And then he had the follow-up question really stunned me. And that was literally like what I call the great aha, like, oh, right? Which is this question. He says, "Do you want to continue thinking like your father, or do you want to learn to think like me?"
Love that advice.
Yeah. So Steve he was a multimillionaire several times over, specifically involved in home building and real estate and stuff like that. And the little Rolodex in my head went off, and I began watching, like having these little visions, not sugar plums, right? But these little visions of my father borrowing money, not repaying it, always making poor financial choices and how you spent money versus how you invested money. Meanwhile, I would have all these different types of thoughts where I always saw Steve be incredibly generous to people that he didn't know, and he would always do so silently. One of the ones that sticks with me a lot was we used to have this barbecue joint. Because barbecue is a big deal here in North Carolina, and we would go to this barbecue joint, and Steve and Lona, which was his wife, would be sitting there, and they'd be having a nice dinner. And of course, they would have a waitress, kind of waiting on the table. Inevitably, in this particular instance, this particular waitress had been there a while. First time they had waited on Steve, and Steve actually wanted to know part of her backstory. Mm-hmm. And he found out that she was a single mom, that baby daddy had run off, and that, wasn't taking care of her. And she was just, she was working 3 jobs, trying to make ends meet and trying to take care of. And he just smiled at her, and he would just give her words of encouragement. Of course, she went back. They got done with their meal. I watched him pull $1,000 out of his wallet and stick it under the hush puppy basket. Right. And then him and Lona quickly scurry off. And to have her pick up the hush puppy basket and move it over and see like when I say she was wrecked, she was in full blown tears, thanking God, thanking Jesus, thanking like anything she could thank. And because it changed her situation, at least for a short time. Right. And I always wanted to have that same level of impact on people, so that's the early days. The next phase is a little bit different in that Steve gave me a first chance to build a business
Yep.
where he bought me everything that I needed, and obviously had planned to mentor me, had been doing so. And I was roughly 19 years old at the time, and I made a bunch of money, but had never been trained to use the money.
That's problem number 2.
Yeah. And then problem number 3 is I tied my spending habits to my insecurity.
Mm-mm.
So I wanted to prove everybody that the high school dropout was going to be something, was going to make something of his life, was going to be this and going to be that. And, so I start flipping $100 bills at different places and stuff like that. I go out and buy the new sports car with 19% interest because I was a bonehead. And, it didn't take long before I basically lost everything.
Mm-hmm.
I got involved in a toxic relationship that unfortunately really took a toll on my self-belief, and kind of reminded me that I was going to be a quote failure for the rest of my life kind of scenario.
Boy.
I literally walked off the job site, and then I spent the next year just trying to quote unquote find myself.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things that you mentioned was the transition, right? So I've had multiple transitions.
Sure.
You would think I would recognize it by now. But so that happened, and ultimately leading me to be homeless. Homeless largely because, and one of the questions I used to get is, how'd you become homeless? And I was like, well, if I'm being honest, I became homeless because of my ego. I didn't want to admit that I needed help. I didn't want to admit that I needed mentorship. I didn't want to admit that I was wrong. I didn't want to admit that I didn't know what I thought I knew. Like I didn't know. I didn't know what I didn't know. All I knew was I knew it all.
Which is it's a common point, though. A lot of people are too proud to ask for help, myself included. The last thing I want to do is ask for help. But hey, so let's talk about that.
Yeah. Well, I mean, and that's essentially where I was. And then one of the things that dawned on me, I went to a public restroom to get cleaned up. It was a local gym. And I remember it's almost like a movie moment where you're watching the movie. Mm-hmm. And you're like, Jason Bourne walks into he's washing stuff off his hands, and he's looking at the sink, and then he looks up and he sees his eyes, and you're like deadlocked in his eyes. And then he plays the big flashback.
Right.
Well, that actually happened, other than the fact I wasn't washing blood off my hands, kind of thing, in that I lock eyes with myself. And I remember asking myself, how the hell did you get here? Like, you literally had this massive opportunity to really change your family tree. You had this massive opportunity. Like, what thoughts led to what emotions, that led to what attitude, that led to what action? And I started seeing things in that rabbit trail, so to speak. And then I had one of these pivotal quotes that Steve Myrick used to tell me all the time that just came flooding back. And it says, you have to be willing to do today what others won't, so you can have tomorrow what others don't. And I had to ask myself in the moment, I was like, I am not doing things differently than the people before me. I'm following the same trajectory. I followed the same insecurities. I followed the same limiting beliefs. I followed the same inability to strategize for a future, to lay a groundwork. I followed the same process of spend rather than invest. And then I began to ask myself, I wonder if I just do what Steve taught me, if it would work. And I was very fortunate. I found my faith a few weeks later after escaping a suicide attempt. Yes, that's part of my story. And found my faith along the way. And then within 3 weeks from that moment, Steve Myrick gives me a second chance.
Oh gosh. Okay. You had to go low before you could actually realize that you had a gift right at your feet the whole time.
That's right, for sure. And it was interesting. It's a whole lengthy conversation that story is fairly lengthy, but essentially, the people that had taken over from me were not performing as well as they should. They technically owed Steve money. They basically said they weren't coming back. I overheard it after being back on Steve Myrick's framing crew with my father, making about $12 an hour. So I wasn't making like bank. Just trying to get myself reestablished.
Sure.
And my dad sends me next door to basically, reframe this garage door and, kind of like make it straight, basically, is what it boiled down to. And I overhear these guys talking very poorly about Steve, about how he's not paying his bills, which was completely asinine.
Right.
And then, but I walk away from the house and I'm like super irate. Like I'm just super angry. I'm like, how dare they talk? Like I'm thinking to myself, how dare they talk? This guy is amazing. He would give us shirt to every, like that's kind of thing. And then a little quiet, little spirit, if you will, in my chest got really hot. And this is what it said. It said, "Didn't you do the same thing?"
Ha.
And I was like, oh no, right? And sure enough, it did do one thing that I thought was pretty powerful because I had been hiding from Steve. Even though he put me back on I knew for a fact he allowed me back on the framing crew because that was his decision, right?
Mm-hmm.
But I would, he'd come around the corner. I would go hide behind the house. I've been doing that all week long.
Why
Shame.
did you hide? Shame. Okay.
Shame. Yeah, absolutely. Right. I knew from almost day one when I walked off the job site that I was going to regret that decision.
But you did it anyway.
I did it anyway because I wasn't emotionally aware enough to know that my mental mindset was not in a place to make big decisions.
Okay.
And I feel like a lot of us get there sometimes. We get into a situation where we're trying to make a big decision, but we're tired, we're hungry, we haven't had a break or a rest in a really long space of time, and then as a result, that's where most of our bad decisions come from. Or it's an emotional response or reaction versus something that you're trying to choose. And in this particular situation, I saw Steve come back around the corner. And it was a Friday afternoon. We're trying to get ready to leave because we used to do what we called knock off at 2:00, which means everybody in the construction industry, we knock off 2:00. We go and start our weekend, and then everybody's out of money by Monday, kind of thing, right? And I had the courage to talk to him and knocked on his window, and he rolled his little window down. He's like, "How's your head now, boy?" I'm like, it's getting better. What can I do you for? I said, well, I overheard these guys. This is what they're saying. If they leave, can I take over Monday? And he says, boy, are you crazy? I'm like, and he's like laughing at me. I'm like, he goes, boy, you burned me. Why? That makes no sense. I bought you tools. I bought you insurance. I got you people. I took care of your payroll. I handled everything, your back office, all of it. Like, boy, like I just got back on the framing crew. And I'm thinking to myself, all that's true. Every bit of that's 100% accurate. And I just remember looking at him. I said, just let me do this. And he just kind of like stunned. He goes, boy, I'm not buying you the tools and equipment and insurance and stuff like that. I'm not doing that again. All the stuff you see over there, those guys bought from me. That's your old stuff. I'm thinking to myself, okay. And I said, I'll figure it out by Monday. If you'll give me the opportunity, if you'll just give me my opportunity, if you'll give me the opportunity, the second chance, I will never let you down again. Never. And he was stunned. He was shocked.
You were ready.
I don't even know where the words came from.
Okay. Well, something you felt you were ready. You'd had enough, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And then, so he reluctantly agrees to let me finish the house if the guys don't come back Monday by a certain time, 9 a.m. to be specific. So he rolls off. My dad comes over. My dad overhears the conversation. He's livid. He's like, boy, I just got you back on the framing crew, like all this kind of stuff. I'm like, this is something I've got to do. Like, I'm like crazy, like super passionate. He just kind of, and he's stunned. He takes a step back. He goes over to the old beat up work van that Steve actually owned and begins pulling tools out. I'm like, what are you doing? He's like, do you remember working with me and your granddaddy in the summer times? I said, yes, sir. He goes, what was the scaffolding made from? I went, wood. Ladders, wood. Pump jacks, wood. Braces, wood. All right, boys, start pulling stuff out of the trash piles. We got scaffolding to build. And we spent the entire weekend and my entire paycheck basically setting myself up to potentially take, basically restart with a second chance that I wasn't even sure was going to happen. Right. I had no idea if the guys were officially going to come back Monday or not. And lo and behold, I was there super early. Steve rolls around. I'm like, can I go yet? He's like, it's not 9 o'clock yet. 9:02 rolls around. He's like, boy, what you waiting on? And I went to work. And so out of a one-man show for the next 5 or 6 homes that we did, and out of the trash piles, that was the building blocks of one of my businesses that I have now. In fact, the largest of the businesses that does top line of eight figures ish, kind of like pretty high 8 figures, and then also employs 400 plus people. And all of that because I decided to be radically honest with myself and let a mentor me.
Mentors are so important. Obviously, this podcast is, Mentors and Moguls. And the whole reason why I put this podcast together is because people like you have great stories. You've got great advice, but people, maybe they don't know who you are. They want to hear your story. Maybe they're feeling exactly what you're feeling. Maybe they're where you were and they need to know, okay, it's great that you've made a lot of money, but I don't know how to get from my desperate situation and my mind is so messed up. I don't have anybody giving me tools. I don't have anybody giving me a hand up. I don't know how to get from here to there. So what was one of the things that you felt you think was the most helpful, the most compelling for you to be accountable and change the way you did things, change the way you saw things? And you said, I've had enough. I'm not going to be a victim anymore. I'm going to take control and help myself. What's something that someone else can recognize within themselves, maybe to tap into and say, have you had enough of feeling like this? Here's what you need to really think about.
Yeah, I think for me, the word resolve comes to mind. And the way in which I approach resolve is you find someone who has the aspirational identity that you want. Right. Even now, I find myself still chasing Steve, and he passed away in 2003. Right. He wasn't an author and a speaker. He never graced the stage, but his impact, even when they had his funeral, it was like people wrapped around the block. The guy made impact everywhere he went. And I can only assume I'm one of many that went on to do some special things because of him. And so as a result, he was my aspirational identity. I wanted to be a man of integrity. I wanted to be a man of humility. I wanted to be a man of character. I wanted to be a leader that was followed because of influence, not because of manipulation or title. Like I wanted to be able to have a brighter financial career because I did a good job at actually serving people. Right. When the traditional world is teaching you, no, you need to go out and just create your business plan, create this, do that. Like this, it's all strategy, climb over everybody you can get to kind of, this, that, and like just, and I never resonated with that. And Steve was my beacon, right? He was my lighthouse, right? So when I would get in doubt, I would, as a person of faith, I'd say, what would Jesus do? But I'd also say, what would Steve do? Right. And as I was kind of going through that, it was one of those situations where I had to have enough resolve to realize that if I really wanted to chase the behavior patterns and the results that he wanted, I was going to have to follow something I call principles. And I'm a big believer that principles govern promises. So no matter what promise you're looking for, you want a brighter relationship, you want a brighter financial measure, you want a brighter business future, you want a brighter impact. There are principles to get there. And one of the things that Steve taught me was all you have to do is to find the principles and follow them. Right. So if I want to scale a business, for example, one of the things that it's a small little formula, it's super easy. Right. And I've learned by the way, I learned everything by mistake. Right.
Yeah. You're never going to forget those lessons.
That's right. And, and so I typically learn by getting a 4x4 upside the head. Hey, bonehead, don't do it that way.
Okay.
And one of those is, as an owner of a few different businesses now, I had a super success with one of them. Like, okay, cool. I'm going to fast forward at this time. So I'm going to throw money at this, right? With not a true strategy. And of course, all I did was blow money in, which wasn't, good. My wife reminded me of it, which thank you, baby. Don't do that kind of thing. Which then kind of said, okay, well, how did I build CHE? And CHE is the acronym for Custom Home Exteriors, or the CHE companies, which is the flagship business. And I said, well, what did Steve teach me to do? He said, test it. So test your hypothesis, test your ideas, test your service, test your product, see if the market needs it, wants it, pursues it. And if that checkbox gets checked, now you invest in it.
There you go.
You invest more time, talent, and resources in that direction. Maybe you bring on a management team. Maybe you buy a piece of equipment, or you do something to, basically leverage yourself rather than debt necessarily to go out and make that a reality. And if that checks out, then you scale it.
There you go.
And I find that as entrepreneurs, especially ones that are super hungry, super triple type A, as like you mentioned earlier, right? We want to scale before we've tested.
Yes.
Yeah. So every single time that I've done that, it's cost me lots of money every time.
But that's great advice in itself right there. Everybody wants to jump to the finish line, and it doesn't work that way.
Yeah. Well, and as an entrepreneur, we're inventors.
Yep.
Largely there's the road has not been laid.
Hmm.
I'm the guy that looks at a set of trees out in front of me and says, "Hey, we need a road here. Hand me the machete." Right. And then I go and start chopping stuff down. My team behind me is like, "What is he doing? Where is he going?" And then I get about halfway down the road and they're like, "Hey, he's actually doing this. This is interesting. Huh? Hey guys, I need someone to come behind me and put some curb and gutter in. Like, come in here. We're gonna need asphalt next. We're gonna need retaining wall over here. Can you guys do that? Okay, cool. I'm gonna keep chopping." Right. And I find that entrepreneurs are very much that way. They're one part visionary and one part strategist.
Hmm.
Like one of the things I tell my team all the time is, guys, I can see 5 years ahead, but I can't see 5 minutes ahead. Right.
That's all right.
It comes about, surrounding yourself with the right people and kind of moving forward. Coincidentally, if you don't surround yourself with the right people, you will also spend and lose money. I've done that quite a few times.
Hmm.
But I think the biggest mistake I ever made in business, ever, and this is a guiding principle for us now, was trying to build a business without building myself.
Hmm.
A lot of us think that your strengths and tactics and strategies and business plans and all this kind of stuff can ultimately get you to the next level. My first business had gotten to about $10 million in top line revenue. This is, pushing 15 years ago. And, I thought that I had it figured out, but again, I dropped out of high school. I got a GED, never been to college. Everything that I've done has been learning by experience, I guess is what the best way to say it. I had never taken a business to 8 figures in revenue ever. Right. I didn't, at the time, I couldn't even read a financial statement properly. Like it took me a while before I actually understood that. And I'll never forget this. I had this young lady that was kind of operating as a receptionist for one of our departments at the time. And one of the things that I've always done is I've always done profit sharing for my team.
Hmm.
Like I want them to feel as invested as I am in the business. Therefore, they get rewarded for the outcome.
Right. Smart.
Some think I'm foolish because it's discretionary money that technically goes into my retirement. And I'm just like, well, they're playing an active role helping me build this, and I can't build it without them. So, but I'll never forget this. One of the qualifications was you had to go through a financial literacy program that we supplied to qualify to then participate in the profit sharing plan. The reason I did that was, hey, I'm going to do that because I want to make sure if I'm going to give you money, quote unquote, free money, I want to make sure you at least stand a chance of investing it properly or doing something properly with it. And this young lady was asking me, she said, well, my husband and I, we can't find a babysitter. Is it okay if I participate in profit sharing without attending this function? And I was unloading some boxes at the time. And I just kind of said, no, and just went back to what I was doing. And out of the corner of my ear, I hear, I'm like, whoa, I turned around like, what is going on? Like, what? And she's like, well, my husband and I, we don't have the money for a babysitter. Da, da, da. I failed to tell her that I was going to bring in somebody to babysit the kids while the parents are going through the class. And the reason I bring that story up is because when it comes to building yourself, you have to be self-aware enough to know that there's areas to continually be building within yourself.
Mm-hmm.
And as entrepreneurs, we get so focused on the vision and the strategy and going after it and trying to make something special happen that we can lose sight of the fact that we impact people's lives positively or negatively every single day.
That's right. That's right. That's right. Well, you impact people's lives. You've got a annual retreat, I'll call it. I'm going to let you talk about that. And you also have a terrific book here, the Journey Principles, which I have right here, read it cover to cover. And you've got some amazing tidbits that we haven't even touched on in here. You talk a little bit about what drives you. I love your ethics, of course. And I love the fact that you talk about being a giver and not a taker. Can you explain what is a giver and what is a taker and why is that important to you?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, the first thing we have to realize about givers are these are people that, much like Steve, they give because they want to,
Mm-hmm.
right? Takers, on the other hand, are the best analogy I can use is my father, right? So he was always taking from people, whether it be money, time, talent, resources, whatever, and never returning that favor to someone else.
Mm.
And then I'll use the third one. The third one was actually my grandmother, my nanny that I mentioned at the very beginning of the show, who is what I refer to as in the bridge. So there's a giver, there's a taker, and there's also a neutral. The neutral is the person who is in the between, either becoming a giver or becoming a taker.
Mm.
So, for example, my grandmother was not a very good mother to my mother. I found out later, years after she had passed away, that she was an alcoholic, wasn't necessarily paying attention, put my mom in harm's way numerous times.
Mm.
And then when I was born, the day I was born, she actually stopped drinking cold turkey.
Mm.
And she kind of viewed me as her, I guess, I would assume she viewed me as her do-over.
Sure.
Right.
Sure.
So that's where a taker is actually going from a giver. And the primary difference between the taker and the giver specifically is maturity and perspective. A taker is completely selfish. Everything is about them, how far they can get, where they can go, who they can connect with. I know that one of the things that I know you struggle with, like I do, is like the wrong people trying to get close to us.
Oh, yes.
Right? Because they have this perception, if I can somehow get close to them, then they're going to be able to do this for me, and
Yes.
in that kind of perspective. And then we also have people that we want to help you open the door because we think you're awesome.
Yes.
So that's that giver side. At any one point in time, you have to guard your heart and to know that at any one point in time, a trauma or some kind of circumstance has the ability, if you let it, to take your giving ability away and make you more of a taker, meaning put you back in a position of being more selfish
Mm-hmm.
in kind of the way you're going versus becoming selfless, which is kind of more the giver category. So my grandmother went from taker to giver, right? The trick is even though you have rough times and rough patches and people wound you and hurt you along the way, and I've had lots of that in my life. I haven't had a chance to dig into your total story yet, Heather, but we're going to one day for sure, right? But I've realized that at any point in time, if you're not constantly evaluating where your heart is and where your perspective is, and you're not focused on becoming a giver, and so you can easily slip back into being a taker. So a taker just takes for the sake of taking. They don't want to do anything for other people. It's all about them. A giver, on the other hand, is like a mother, like the supreme is like a Mother Teresa.
Mm-hmm.
Like you love people, you understand that they're on their own journey. You understand that they are already judging themselves with more guilt and shame than you can possibly think of to throw at them to begin with.
Right.
Now you can create distance between you and them, right? It doesn't have to, doesn't necessarily mean they have to be close to you.
Mm-hmm.
Right. But at the same time, if you are the person that's able to be in a loving state on a consistent basis, I find that doors open for you, even though you're not actually pushing for the door to be open.
Right. Well, it's that old theory of attraction,
Mm-hmm.
and water seeks its own level. So
Yeah.
I think that's terrific. I think that a lot of people maybe want to be givers. Maybe they don't know how to be givers, or maybe they've retreated because they started to be a giver and then they got burned so badly they said, I'm never exposing myself that way again. I've been there a few times. And I think you just have to figure out that what's more important, right? I want to be a giver. There's going to be some rotten eggs out there, but maybe that's a lesson I needed to learn, lesson they needed to learn. But that's one of the things that I just loved about you, because you could just continue on with your businesses and say, look, I've already done my story. You figure it out, but you really want to transform people. And that's what I'm all about. I want to try and help one person have the confidence, give them a hand up. And I love that about you. There's so many other layers to Stephen. So we're going to have you back on to talk about the other layers. But for right now, I am so blessed that you came on today. I'm loving that you shared some valuable information, great advice. Some advice that I had not heard framed that way. So I actually love it myself. And I can't wait to talk to you in maybe another 6 months and see where Stephen Scoggins is.
Oh, man. I always love hanging out with you, Heather. You're amazing. Thank you so much for that.
And don't forget to pick up Stephen's book, The Journey Principles. I've earmarked it here. I've read it cover to cover. There's so many great tidbits. There's a lot more to Stephen than we've talked about today. Stephen, where can they find you? Tell me a little bit about some of the events that you're doing. You've got so much more. Tell us, where can we find Stephen Scoggins and get a little bit more of you?
Oh, gosh. If you want to learn more about what we're doing, Instagram is probably the best social channel that I'm using right now, with Stephen_Scoggins with a PH. And then StephenScoggins.com is the easiest place. We're very fortunate. We're about to, this is now public knowledge, so it's like, I'm okay to say it. We're actually getting ready to host a Ed Milet's event here in another month. We've got Mel Robbins and Rob Dyrdek and, gosh, Eric, like his lineup is ridiculous. I'm a little jelly, to be honest, in a good way. And then Ed is actually going to become our headliner at our event called Transform Live that we do once a year, where I bring in amazing thought leaders like yourself to help inspire, encourage, and teach people the practical methodologies on how to level up in their life, their business, and their career. So that's all me. So, I'd love to have support and then help as many people as possible.
Love it. Love it. All right. Well, I highly endorse Stephen. So if you're listening and you want to find more good stuff and more feel good information and advice, go follow Stephen. Hit me back. Tell me what you've learned from him. And Stephen, until next time, thank you so much. Stay well and keep that face smiling.
Appreciate you.
Thanks so much for tuning into the Mentors and Moguls podcast. If you enjoyed today's episode, rate and review this interview and share it with a friend who could benefit from today's guest. You can find bonus video episodes at mentorsandmogulspodcast.com or check out our events page and our blog at heatherrstone.com. Until next time, make it a great day.